In the rural heartland of America, deep in a forgotten corner of a sleepy town, there stands an old abandoned gas station on a long, desolate stretch of highway. Time has worn it down. The building is dilapidated, the windows shattered, and the pumps rusted. Yet, despite the decay, the locals avoid this place with an uncanny hesitation. There are whispers of something far darker lurking here. Something that has terrified anyone who has ventured too close at night. It's a mystery that has never been solved. No one knows exactly why this gas station is haunted, but the spirit that lingers there is no ordinary ghost. She's not looking for rest, she's seeking revenge. James Carter, a young man from a neighboring town, had just landed his first job in the small rural town of Pine Hill. He was eager, excited, and ready to take on the responsibilities of a night shift attendant at the old gas station on Highway 42. The job paid well, and James had heard nothing but praise about how simple it was. No one would come by during the night, except the occasional trucker or passing vehicle, and the old station had little traffic after dark. However, what James didn't know was that the station had a dark past, one that the locals only whispered about in hushed tones. It wasn't something that came up in conversation with newcomers, especially when they needed someone to work the graveyard shift. The previous attendants had all left without a word, their eyes wide with fear, their faces pale, but James was too excited to notice the signs. His first night was uneventful. The highway was as empty as he had imagined, with no cars passing by, and only the occasional sound of wind rustling the trees around the station. He spent most of his time reading a book in the break room, listening to the occasional rattle of the old pumps. Everything seemed normal until it hit midnight. That's when things began to feel off. The night grew colder. The wind picked up, howling through the trees. And then he heard something. A soft sound, almost like a whisper, carried by the wind. He shrugged it off as the natural sounds of the night, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was out of place. Around 1 a.m., the temperature dropped even further. A deep chill seeped into the walls of the station, and a strange unease filled the air. As James stepped outside to check the pumps, he saw a figure standing near one of the old gas pumps. At first, he thought it was a trick of the moonlight, but as his eyes adjusted, he saw it clearly. An old woman, hunched over, wrapped in a long white shawl with an empty metal bowl in her hands. Her face was obscured by the shadows, but James could feel her gaze fixed on him. Her eyes were cold, empty. The air around her seemed to warp with a strange, unsettling energy. James froze, his heart raced in his chest as he approached her. "Ma'am?" he called out, his voice shaking. "What are you doing here at this hour? Can I help you with something?" The old woman didn't answer immediately. She simply stared at him with an unblinking, unsettling gaze. When she finally spoke, her voice was like a rasping whisper, filled with an eerie chill that seemed to seep into James's bones. "Water," she said simply. "I need water." James's gut twisted. Something about her felt wrong, but his instinct was to help. He quickly fetched a glass of water and handed it to her, trying to ignore the unease gnawing at him. She took the glass from him, but her hands trembled so violently that the water spilled out and splashed onto the ground. She dropped the glass as though she had no idea how to hold it, and without saying another word, she turned and walked into the woods that bordered the station. James stood there for a moment, bewildered. His pulse raced and his breath came out in short gasps. He told himself it was just a crazy woman, nothing to be afraid of. He went back inside, trying to shake the feeling that something sinister had just occurred. The next night, James told himself it was just a fluke, a strange occurrence. Maybe the woman had been lost. But as the clock struck midnight, the same eerie feeling settled over the gas station. The air grew thick, and James found himself glancing nervously at the door every few minutes, waiting for something to happen. At around 1 a.m., the woman appeared again. She stood near the same pump, her bowl in hand, just like the night before. This time, she spoke with more urgency in her voice. a strange edge of desperation. "Fill the tank," she said. "I need to go far away." James's stomach churned. The same strange request, the same unsettling presence. But he didn't want to anger her, so he hesitantly walked over to the pump and began filling her bowl with gas. As he did, he could feel her eyes on him, burning into his back. Once the bowl was full, the woman muttered something under her breath, a soft, unintelligible phrase, and then slowly turned away, disappearing into the trees without another word. This time, James didn't try to rationalize it. He had heard the rumors but had dismissed them as superstitions. But now he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. By the third night, James was terrified. He couldn't sleep, couldn't stop thinking about the old woman. He felt like she was always watching, always waiting for him. The wind howled louder that night, rattling the walls of the station. The clocks ticked away, the minutes dragging on like hours. At 1 a.m. she appeared again, but this time it was different. Her face was visible, her features twisted and dark, her skin pale as if drained of life. Her eyes glowed a bright fiery red, and her smile was monstrous, revealing teeth that seemed far too sharp. James's heart skipped a beat as the woman spoke to him, her voice now filled with cold fury. "If you don't fill the tank, no one will save you," she hissed. James's knees weakened. He knew he couldn't refuse her this time. The fear that gripped him was overwhelming, but he had to do something. With shaking hands, he hurried to the pump, filling her bowl once again, this time spilling some of the fuel on the ground. The woman's laughter echoed through the night, sending chills down James's spine. Her form disappeared into the woods, leaving James standing there, trembling. He couldn't understand what was happening, but he knew one thing: he had to get out of there. The next morning, he sought answers from the older employees. They had all seen the woman before, and they all told him the same thing. The old woman's name was Evelyn. She had once been a wealthy widow who lived in the town, known for her vast collection of gold and jewels. One night, robbers attacked her near the gas station, killing her for her fortune. As she died, she cursed the land and vowed to take revenge on anyone who crossed her path. Since then, every new moon, her restless spirit roams the area, seeking someone to release her from her eternal torment. And anyone who works the night shift at the gas station is cursed to suffer at her hands. James didn't know if he could survive another night at the station, but he was determined to finish his shift. It would be his last. He was going to quit. As the clock struck midnight, the winds picked up, and James's skin prickled with the same dread he had felt before. Then, as if on cue, the woman appeared again. Her eyes glowed like burning embers, and her smile twisted into a grin full of malice. "Free me, and you will be safe forever," she whispered. But James didn't listen. He couldn't. He had heard enough. He refused to be her next victim. Suddenly, everything around him went black. The station lights flickered and then died completely, leaving him in total darkness. The air grew thick with tension, and James could feel the ground beneath his feet tremble. The woman's laugh filled the space, growing louder and more distorted, until it felt like the very walls were closing in on him. James tried to move, but his legs wouldn't obey him. He felt an icy hand brush his shoulder. When he turned, no one was there. But then, a horrifying realization struck him. There was no shadow cast by the woman. She was coming from within him. His vision blurred, his thoughts scattered, and he collapsed to the ground. The next morning, the gas station was empty.